What election are we talking about?
We're talking about the Amazon union election at a warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. It is the first union election at an Amazon warehouse in the United States ever. The last time Amazon had a union drive or faced a union drive was in 2014, a group of machinists in Delaware that lost. So the election is 6 weeks long. It started on February 8th and it's ending on March 30th. And it's voting by mail. And workers are, in the process of voting right now. And the union is, doing its best to continue organizing workers. Amazon is waging like a full-blown union busting campaign, which has been going on for like the past month or even before the election started. So there's a lot going on down there. There are a ton of reporters down there. 5,800 workers are eligible to vote in this election, which was like slightly bigger than the union had originally anticipated. But Amazon increased the size of, or argued and pushed to get the size of the unit increased to make it harder for the union to win.
So it seems really incredible given what a large employer Amazon is, that this is only the second attempt and the closest that people have come to forming a union at Amazon. Can you give us a little context for why it is that Amazon workers haven't unionized already and some of the techniques that are used to prevent them from doing so?
Yeah. So actually, it might seem like there are walkouts and sickouts and strikes happening at Amazon warehouses all over the country. This is a relatively new phenomenon. The first time workers in the United States, Amazon workers in the United States, walked out of a facility was in late 2018. And back then, I remember, I wasn't reporting back then, but like I was reporting shortly thereafter on Amazon. And when like workers would walk out, like everyone would go crazy on Twitter, or it was just like huge news. Now when that happens, like no one really cares because it's happening all the time. When the pandemic started, people care, but it's just not as big of a deal. When the pandemic started, you saw like a massive uptick in workers organizing, walkouts, sickouts, petition drives. I think the main locations where this has been going on is like in New York City at a Staten Island warehouse, and Queens warehouse, on the south side of Chicago, in the Inland Empire, which is in California, in Sacramento. And then the workers who have gotten the furthest are in the Twin Cities in Minnesota before this Amazon union drive happened. So all of that was going on back in March and April. And then the Amazon workers in Alabama approached the union. Well, this warehouse actually only opened in March, so it's brand new. Within a couple of weeks or months, you have workers approach the RWDSU, which is the Retail Warehouse RWD Department Store Union. By October, they went public with their union drive. Like the momentum, the buildup was so fast, like faster than any sort of Amazon union drive has been so far. And I think like one of the factors for that is because, one of the reasons why this happened so quickly in Alabama is because the union drive, people were extremely upset about how Amazon was handling the coronavirus pandemic. Like not at this Alabama warehouse, they could see that Amazon was making so much money off of this pandemic that Jeff Bezos, had made like $100 billion in the course of like a few months. This sort of triggered workers to organize, and also just gave the union drive like a lot of momentum that we hadn't seen elsewhere so far.
So often the way we talk about unions now, the contemporary conversation tends to feature, a white guy in a hard hat in an industrial Midwest kind of a setting. And I think that part of why what's going on in Bessemer has really captured the attention of some folks in the media, and also driven a lot of politicians down there. Last week or earlier this week, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, Terry Sewell, who's obviously from Alabama, Nikita Williams, were all down there lending support. And it does seem to me that the fact that these workers are predominantly Black makes this an interesting, puts an interesting spin on the typical narrative of what it means to be a part of a union.
So like the main concern when they came up to the union was like, we need help. We want to organize here, was sort of the speed of work and sort of the productivity requirements. Anyone who knows what an Amazon job is like they are tracking like every minute, like what you're doing. And if you stop doing stuff, you'll start being written up, or it'll start tracking like how long you have been unproductive. Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of workers, a lot of the workers at the facility, it feels like they're being treated like, cogs in a machine. And there's like a relationship there, or a tie there with the relationship with RWDSU to what's going on with that, and sort of like racial justice and civil rights issues. It feels like connected to them. And a lot of the organizers are sort of framing it that way to workers when they're organizing. The facility is 85% Black and 65% women.
I read perhaps in one of your pieces that there was some frustration over Amazon's kind of performative support of Black Lives Matter over the summer that didn't accord with how they were treating their workers. And that part of the indignation and part of what might have fueled folks to want to act now and unionize now is how frustrating it was to hear them, adopt the slogan, but not manifest Black Lives Mattering in their business practices and their employment practices.
Right. So Amazon donated $1 million to Black Lives Matter, I believe.
Oh, a whole million.
Yeah, which is nothing really. They are, have done a ton of different, I can't even remember all of the specific things that they did to sort of, which is not surprising at all, but sort of to show that they were supportive of like what was going on, the protests that were going on this summer. To workers at the facility who I've talked to, like they really do not buy that at all. In fact, like the fact that Amazon, and we can talk about this more, but one of their union busting tactics, which is a pretty traditional one, was to hold these anti-union, they're called captive audience meetings during the workday. They held like, workers have had to go to like 6 of them, these hour-long meetings. But the fact that they can afford to do those while they can't afford to let people, have enough time to go to the bathroom or to, get to, by the time they get to their car on their lunch break, like they've walked like 2 football fields and they have to turn around. The fact that like those things are so, they won't budge on those things, like doesn't make sense to them or feels like deeply insulting when you're then going and spending 6 hours, like making me sit through a anti-union meeting.
So you mentioned some of the pressures against, some of the union busting tactics that union busting companies employ to prevent people from wanting to vote to unionize. And in the office place, can you talk a little bit about what Amazon has been doing in that regard?
So, Amazon has made its anti-union stance like pretty clear since it was founded, or since the first, I guess there was a union election back in 1998 at a call center. A lot of the way the work is set up and individualized, and like even within the like delivery networks, there are so many different small companies. Like it's all structured around, keeping unions out. That said, like with this specific election, from I believe starting in December, they launched a website called doitwithoutdues.com, which was like sort of this like pastel colored, like fun dancing animals, dogs, like fun graphics, and then all these reasons why workers should vote no. They were, posting anti-union reasons like why the union would, take away your benefits, or you could end up with like lower wages in like bathroom stalls, like all over the warehouse. They were sending out text messages with like this same sort of rhetoric. In fact, they are still doing that basically on a daily basis. A worker showed me their phone, and it was like 2 times a day they get a text message from Amazon, like, saying something about why they should vote no or why they should vote in this location or whatever. Those are pretty conventional tactics. They were also, like I was saying, holding captive audience meetings. These are meetings. These are like framed as educational meetings during the workday where a union avoidance consultant from outside the company explains like what the main sort of reasons are for not joining a union. And they're always the same. This isn't, they're basically like, you're going to have to pay dues. You're going to have to pay like $500 of your paycheck is going to go to the union. You don't know how that's going to be used. In fact, like the union, you know, is going to sort of come in the way between my relationship with you or like our relationship with each other. And that might end up with like, you might end up with like lower wages. You might end up with fewer benefits. So that all happened. But they also did some things that were like, hadn't happened before. That were just like very specific to like this location of this union. Like they actually convinced the county of Jefferson County, which is where Bessemer is, to change a traffic light. This is like basically the only place union organizers had direct access to workers is when they're like exiting and entering during shift change. There's a tiny, you know, piece of public sidewalk where union organizers would stand basically 24/7 and just be like, hey, can you sign a card? Or hey, do you want to talk about the union? They changed the traffic light, which was sort of like the thing that their whole organizing strategy was predicated upon. You know, that was pretty like innovative in some ways. Like no one I had like talked to had ever heard of any union or any company doing anything like that. They also convinced USPS to install a mailbox like a feet away from the front door of the facility. And then they said they started texting workers like last week saying, you know, you should really vote from this mailbox. It's secure. Like, you don't have to worry about your ballot. But workers were like, we feel like very surveilled. Also, like the NLRB had said no voting in person. So they're sort of like circumventing that. And now lawyers are saying like this could be grounds for unfair labor practice charge. Like if the election ends up being close, these are things that the union can sort of challenge. But Amazon is doing them and like must think that they're sort of like legal, or at least like within the realm of something they could argue is legal.
Yeah, these techniques seem kind of like a lot. Like it seems like they're doing more than what I would have expected in my head was legal. So, I mean, so where is the line? What kind of behaviors does the NLRB, you know, prevent or bar if all of this stuff is allowed?
Yeah. I mean, I think labor law in this country is extremely weak, but the National Labor Relations Act says that, you know, an employer cannot interfere with a worker's right to collectively organize or to engage in concerted activity, to join a union, to collectively bargain. They also can't surveil workers who are unionizing, and they can't even create the impression of surveillance. That sounds like relatively good, but I think there's just like so much gray area. There's so much area where like union avoidance consultants have developed strategies for sort of getting around that. In terms of like, instead of asking a worker, hey, do you support the union drive? You can just be like, hey, like, I just really want to know how you're feeling, and then sense that out and then start, you know, talking about like reasons why like a union could be bad. You never like say, I mean, at least from talking to union avoidance consultants myself, like you never like say like definite, like this is going to happen. You said this might happen. You might lose all of your wages. We might pack up and leave, or like we might pack up and leave, or stuff like that.
The fact that there is a union avoidance consultant that is hired by a company should be like de facto you're trying to interfere with your workers' right to unionize. Like, I feel like I'm losing my mind. There are people called union avoidance consultants whose job are to prevent unions from being established at companies. Companies hire these people to do that job, and that's not considered to be on its face a company trying. That's not like direct evidence of a company trying to interfere with its workers' ability to unionize.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I think if the vote is at all close, like there's just going to be like it's just going to be like a really drawn out legal battle on on both sides, probably.
Because what are the implications? If they're successful, what does this mean for Amazon?
I mean, it means that Amazon has to sit down and bargain with the union, like work toward negotiating a contract. So they have to bargain over every sort of aspect of the working conditions there, which, they've never done before. And no one, can't really imagine how they will do it. I guess there is the precedent in Minnesota of the Wood Center, which is like this worker center that represents Somali Amazon warehouse workers. And they've actually maybe been the only group in the United States that's sort of been able to negotiate with Amazon over a few things. They got extended break time during Ramadan. They got like prayer time, like negotiated. This was without a union contract, but there's really no precedent for how Amazon would deal with like a union contract. And I think a lot of the concerns people have aren't directly around wages or benefits. They're around like being surveilled or like the productivity algorithms or like sort of more things about like sort of squeezing productivity out of workers with specific technologies. That sort of like isn't really what union contracts look like these days. Like most union contracts are very specifically about wages and benefits. So I think it would really open up like a new conversation about, or like sort of open up a new type of contract or organizing.